When we talk about building powerful AI, it's so easy to get caught up in the idea of it being this wild, creative experiment. But here's the thing, building AI that people can actually trust, that's not an art project. It's a serious engineering discipline. And like any big engineering project, you absolutely need a solid blueprint before you even think about laying the first brick. A plan that bakes in safety and responsibility right from the start. So today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to unpack the blueprint for governing AI where it matters most, in the design and build phases. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about laying that governance foundation. Then, we'll get into how to assess potential harms, what to do about managing those inherent risks, and we'll wrap up with why it is absolutely mandatory to document everything. Think of it as our step-by-step architectural plan. And this really brings us to the biggest question on the table for any AI team, right? How in the world do you build a system that's safe, responsible, and compliant, not as some kind of afterthought you tack on at the end, but by its very design? How do you weave that stuff into its DNA from moment one? Well, the answer really comes down to timing. It's all about having a structured governance framework that you put into practice before anyone even thinks about writing a single line of code. Look, proactive governance isn't just some best practice. In the world of AI, it's really the only way you're going to build something that lasts and that you can be proud of. All right, let's get into it. First up, laying the governance foundation. It's just like building a skyscraper, isn't it? Your AI system is only going to be as strong as the foundation it's sitting on. If you get this part right, everything else you build on top of it is just so much more stable and secure. So, this foundation, it's really made up of four crucial pillars. First, you've got to define the business context and the use case. What problem are you actually trying to solve here? Second, you have to nail down all the applicable laws and regulations. You just can't play the game if you don't know the rules. Third, you need to map out all your stakeholders. Who's building this, who's using it, and who's going to be impacted by it. And finally, you got to establish clear operational controls. Who gets to do what, and maybe more importantly, who owns the kill switch if things go south. And to really get a handle on that stakeholder mapping piece, let's look at the main players in this whole ecosystem. Generally, you can break it down into four key roles. You've got the developer, these are your tech creators, the provider, who actually puts the system out on the market, the deployer, who uses the AI in a professional context, and of course, the user. That's pretty much anyone who interacts with the AI. Each one brings a totally unique perspective to the table. And what's really key here is that each of these folks needs something totally different from your governance plan, right? A developer, they need crystal clear instructions on the model's purpose and any legal no-go zones. The deployer, let's say it's a bank using an AI for loan applications, they have to know how that thing was made so they can use it responsibly. And then you have the user. They just need simple, clear guidance on what the system can and can't do and a way to give feedback. See, this is precisely why mapping these stakeholders out early isn't just a nice to have, it's completely non-negotiable. Okay, let's shift gears to the next phase. Once that foundation is solid, we have to start stress testing the design. This is all about proactively looking for trouble by assessing potential harms. It's about asking what could go wrong long before it ever has a chance to. And this is exactly where a mistake in that first stage, like missing a whole group of stakeholders, can create some massive blind spots. The main tool we use for this is called an Algorithmic Impact Assessment, or an AIA. You can kind of think of it like a formal investigation. It's a really structured way to systematically check out all the risks and ethical implications of an AI system. This isn't about guesswork. It's a serious, documented analysis of how this thing could negatively impact people, groups, or even society as a whole. Great frameworks like the one from NIST break this whole assessment process down into three really clear stages: map, measure, and manage. So first you map the context. Who's involved? What are the possible impacts, good and bad? Next, you measure the risks you found. How likely are they to happen, and how bad would it be if they did? And finally, you come up with a plan to manage those risks. And that measure phase, it really boils down to this simple but incredibly powerful formula. Risk isn't just about how bad something could be. It's about the severity of that harm multiplied by the probability of it actually happening. Getting this right helps you quantify and compare all kinds of different risks on the level playing field. And this is where that formula really comes to life. A harms matrix, like this one, is just a fantastic tool for visualizing risk. You plot how likely a harm is against how severe it would be, and boom, it immediately sorts your risks into these high, medium, and low priority zones. You often see them colored red, yellow, and green. It takes this abstract list of worries and turns it into a clear, prioritized action plan. It's great. So, we've mapped out the terrain, and we've measured the dangers. Now we get to the manage phase. This is where we start actively responding to the risks we found. This is where all that analysis turns into real action. Now, the first rule of managing risk is to follow what's called the mitigation hierarchy. Your most powerful move, always, is to just avoid the risk. Seriously, if a use case is just way too dangerous, the right call is to not build it. Period. If you can't avoid it, then your next best option is to minimize it with technical controls and policies. And then, as a last resort, you have to have a plan to remediate any harms that might still happen. And the good news is, you've got a whole toolkit to help you with this. Early on, in planning and design, things like use case evaluations and stakeholder mapping help you catch risks before they get out of hand. Later in the game, you can use benchmarking to test your model against industry standards, and even run pre-deployment pilots in a controlled environment to see how it really behaves before it goes live. To make sure all these tools are actually being used right, a lot of organizations use something called the 3 lines of defense model. The first line is your management and the people who own the processes. They're implementing the risk policies day to day. The second line is made up of specialized teams, maybe compliance or legal, who are watching for emerging risks. And that third line, that's your internal audit, providing an independent check to make sure the first 2 lines are actually working. It's a really solid structure for accountability. Okay, that brings us to the final piece of our governance blueprint. And honestly, it's maybe the most crucial part. Because if you didn't write it down, it basically didn't happen. Documentation isn't just a suggestion, it is the mandate that holds this entire process together. This quote really says it all, doesn't it? It is essential to document everything. Every decision, every analysis, every single test. But pay attention to that last part, regardless of whether it pertains to regulatory requirements. This is so much more than just ticking a compliance box. It's about creating a clear record of due diligence, building knowledge inside your organization, and proving you're committed to doing this the right way. So, what does this paper trail actually look like? Well, it's a log of all the key decisions made by every stakeholder. It's clear documentation on your data sources, where it came from, its whole history. It includes things like model cards, which are kind of like nutrition labels for AI. They explain what a model does and what its limits are. It also has to include all your records from training, testing, and validation, and, super importantly, a pre-made plan for how you're going to fix any problems that pop up. When it comes down to it, all this careful documentation really serves 2 critical audiences. For regulators, it's your proof that you followed the rules and governed responsibly. But just as important, for consumers and the public, it's the bedrock of transparency and trust. One of those protects you from getting fined, the other one earns you the right to keep innovating. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with this one last thought. Imagine your AI's paper trail is complete. An auditor comes knocking. What story is that documentation going to tell? Will it be a clear record of your due diligence, showing everyone how thoughtful and responsible your process was? Or will it become a record of liability, exposing all the gaps and the shortcuts you took? The whole point of the blueprint we've walked through today is to make absolutely sure it's the first one.